I hope you're all here for Accessible Web Mapping Apps, ARIA, WCAG, and 508 compliance. My name is Kelly Hutchins. I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS API for JavaScript team, and I also work with the ArcGIS Online configurable apps. And I'm joined by my colleague, Tao.
Hello, my name is Zhang. I'm a UX architect for ArcGIS Online. I'm also responsible for doing accessibility work, primarily online and JavaScript APIs.
So this is the agenda. We just want to do the little introduction. We'll talk briefly about what 508 and WCAG are. If you already know what these are, it's only like a 5 or 10 minute section, so we'll get to some more technical stuff after that. We'll go over making accessible components. We'll do some demos. We'll show you some automated testing tools, and we'll talk about some accessibility resources that you might find useful. So there are a lot of people in this world with some form of disability. You'll see numbers like 15% of the world population, which equates to about 1 billion people. So when you follow these principles of designing for accessibility, you're actually reaching or building for a big population of people. And as we'll see, I think the number is even larger than that. I kind of feel like it's building it for everybody. The forms of disability are classified into these 4 groups: visual, motor, auditory, and cognitive. So visual is this range from completely blind to some sort of vision loss. So I'm getting older, and as I get older, I find that I can't see things as well. So I think just last week on my iPhone, I went into the accessibility settings and turned on the large text just because I found myself squinting at my phone all the time. So it's sort of a continuum, and we all maybe will be facing these issues as we age, not being able to see as well, or maybe you forgot your glasses, or you're trying to look at a website outside on your laptop with glare on the screen, or you just had your eyes tested and they put the drops in your eye and you can't see very well. So, you know, I think this visual effect really at one point or other in our lives applies to all of us. Motor in general, it means that maybe you're not using a mouse, or you have some sort of repetitive stress injury, or you have limited range of motion, right? So again, this can be more than just a disability where you can't use a mouse for whatever reason and have to use some other assistive technology. It can be that you are walking up to your front door with groceries in your arm, or you're holding your child and you're trying to navigate or find some information on your phone with one hand, your other hand is not available, or you just forgot to bring your mouse and you need to navigate the site in other ways. Auditory, so you can be completely deaf or hard of hearing, or maybe you're just in a noisy environment, or maybe you're sitting out in the conference before the session trying to watch a video like I was, and you don't want everybody around you to hear what you're listening to. So I just turned down the volume, and it's kind of hard to see, but this is captioned. So I can take in the content and watch the video without annoying everybody around me on the train if I forgot my earphones or out in the hallway. And cognitive, again, is a broad range. It's the biggest category of disabilities. It's things like learning disabilities and dyslexia. This is the biggest group, and sort of the ways that we make our website more understandable for people with these cognitive disabilities also makes it more understandable for everybody else. So you make sure that the content stays on the screen for long enough for people to read it. You make sure your website is organized in an easy to understand manner. You make sure that the content is written so that it can be understood by a wide variety of people. So while that makes it easier for people with these disabilities to access your content, I'd argue that it also makes it easier for everybody else to access and understand your content and to use your website. So I think this just highlights what I was saying, is that designing for accessibility is not just designing for these 1 billion people who have some form of disability. It's designing for all of us at different stages in our life, making your web apps more accessible by more people in more places so that your content can be used anywhere people are. If they're holding their child or distracted or in a noisy environment or low light conditions, your content is still usable. So it makes your website better, it doesn't ruin it. So a brief overview of these terms, Section 508 and WCAG. How many of you are already dealing with this 508 compliance or WCAG compliance, or no, you have to? Okay, most of you in this room. So we have a lot of text on this slide. So basically, the Section 508 was part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and it says that people with disabilities have access to the same information technology as those without disabilities. So there's all these standards that we have to follow when we're building the website, which make your website better, not worse. But recently there was this thing called a refresh, which incorporated this other standard. So it brought 508 compliance in line with this other standard you might have heard of called WCAG, which is more of an international standard. Lots of people are using it. It brings these two standards in line and makes the world less confusing. We're not, are we in the 508 bucket? Are we in the WCAG bucket, right? We just meet the WCAG guidelines and we're good to go. So this refresh was published in January 2017, so just a few months ago. And enforcement begins next year, January 2018. Quick overview of what these WCAG guidelines are. So it's organized under 4 principles. The acronym POUR is what you'll sometimes hear as a quick way to remember these: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So again, I think if your website or your content is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, it's better for everybody. So under those 4 principles, there are 12 guidelines that you need to meet in order to be successful. And those guidelines have 3 levels: level A, level AA, and AAA. And let's see what those mean on the next slide. So level A is this minimum set of accessibility. So it doesn't mean that your site is accessible by a wide variety of people or that it meets all the guidelines that we would like it to meet. AA is a generally recognized guideline for web information. And AAA isn't really recommended because there are some barriers that make it more difficult to achieve success. And let's look at an example of one of these. So here is some great documentation. Actually, usually these recommendation or these spec docs are really tough to understand and read, but I find the WCAG documentation is actually really good. So remember we said there are these 4 principles and these 12 guidelines. So here's one guideline. This is guideline 1.2 for time-based media. You need to provide alternatives. And for meeting just the general AA guideline, which is recommended, you want to have captions for your content and your live audio content. To meet the AAA guidelines, this might be a little hard to see in the back. To meet the AAA guidelines, you actually have to have sign language interpretation for all of your content, which I think is a tougher barrier for most people or most organizations to meet, is to actually get that content in sign language interpreted. But for each of the guidelines on here, it has information about what's required, how to meet it, and more details about understanding what this guideline actually means. So I think that this doc, if you haven't already checked it out, is well worth your time. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tao for the technical details.
Okay, so we have 3 main points for the knowledge and techniques, how you make your website or web apps accessible. The first one is focus. So what is focus, right? Focus is, a technical definition, focus indicates which control on the screen currently receives your keyboard focus. We usually call it focus ring. It's kind of the visual indicator of which UI element on the page that receives the keyboard focus. But I have a screenshot here, the sign in button there, that's the blue outline, that's a Chrome default visual style, but you could use CSS to change the style. So it depends on, and then in other browsers like Internet Explorer, Firefox may have a different focus ring. So it kind of depends on the browser and your page style. And another related concept is called tab order. It shows when you use the tab key to navigate through the interactive elements on the page, how that focus ring moves as you tab through. So you can move backward or forward using the tab key and shift tab key. So native interactive HTML elements should be focusable. They should be, the user should be able to use the tab key to set focus to those elements. Those elements include text field, buttons, links, select list, and some other elements, normally they should not be focusable. So paragraph, a div, a span, or headings. Only the focusable elements need to support keyboard interaction. So screen readers, the software assistant technology blind users or non-sighted users use, they have ways to read focusable and non-focusable elements. So I have a demo here. Oh, actually, sorry. I need to open in a new tab. So let me turn on the VoiceOver, which is the screen reader in Mac OS.
VoiceOver on Chrome, non-focusable elements window, frame 0 has keyboard focus.
So
enter URL, require invalid data, edit text.
So if I use tab, because the text will get focus.
OK button, cancel button.
Then for the non-focus element, I use a sort of VoiceOver quick key to navigate.
Heading level 2, non-focusable elements. Stay on top of GIS development at the heading level 3 to list 7 items. Bullet to read an entire document.
So I can use this to read those non-focusable elements.
To move VoiceOver off.
So the point here is you don't want to focus things that should not be focused, because screen readers have other ways to go to this element, but you do need to focus interactive elements on the page. Okay, so the tab order really matters. So WCAG 1.3.2 says that the navigation order, the tabbing order should be logic and intuitive. I think the thing is that sometimes we use CSS to alter the position of certain elements. That may jump the tab order. So you will see sometimes when you press the tab key, the visual focus ring move from here and to here and then go back and forth. That's really confusing for keyboard-only users because they don't know the natural order of the page. And another thing is if certain elements are off screen, we should not set focus to those elements. So one example is this cow side drawer pattern that we have. Sorry. Okay. Okay. For some reason, I can't get out of the full screen. Okay, I'll do this. Okay, get a bunch of this. But yeah, so by default, the elements on the left are out of the screen. So we should use the display long or visibility hidden to hide those elements. So those elements will not get keyboard focus. But once they are shown on the screen, we should change back to say display equal block with all visibility set to visible. So then they can show the keyboard focus ring. So how do you test focus? Focus is probably the basic thing that we need to do to support keyboard users, right? So first thing is, it's pretty simple. Everyone can do it. Tab through the page and see if the tab order is natural. If the tab order isn't really jump around on the page. And then if you see a focus ring suddenly disappear, you may set a focus to an element that is out of the screen. So we should hide those focus screen for off-screen element. And then you may need to rearrange content in the DOM to make sure you have a natural tab order. So if you just see, this is really important if you use CSS to position elements. So make sure you test that and make sure the tab order is still natural, follows the from top to bottom, from left to right reading order. So another topic related to the focus is sometimes you need to manage focus, right? So by default, we usually set tab index equal to 0. So that means we need the DOM's natural order determine the tab order. And then there's some cases that you need to set tab order equal to -1. So you can use JavaScript to kind of control, to programmatically move the focus. One example is like if you have an error message or a menu, if the user, you want to move the focus to those elements when they appear, or if the user press the up and down arrow key to move in the menu, you need to switch the tab index. So it's kind of in line with the user's interaction. But the anti-pattern is you set the tab index to anything equal, larger than 1. That's kind of the anti-pattern. then because that will be the first thing the user tap into it. It may easily jump out of the tab order, so make it confusing for a lot of users. So one example here, I know this is kind of not a realistic example because you probably should use an input option, but this here, I have a custom menu, right? So I have menu item. So initially I set the first item to the tab index to equal to 0. All the other items equal to -1. As I use the arrow key to move down, up and down in the menu, I programmatically set the one that has the keyboard focus to 0, and the rest of them to be -1. So I can show you guys the example here. So this is the HTML here on the left, and on the right, there's some JavaScript code that take the key down event, and then programmatically move the tab index, set of tab index to 0 for the next focusable menu item. So first thing, I'm on the map. So if I move down to the layer, you can see I change the focus, and then because of the CSS I write, they also get as I move down, up and down, I also get the tab index equal to 0 for the current element, and also the current element get the focus indicator. So another concept is called keyboard traps. So you don't want to, in a certain page, in a certain element on the page, you don't want to trap the keyboard focus. So the keyboard user should be able to tab through the whole page without being trapped in one place of that page. The only exception is when you have a model dialog, you want to keep the focus in that model dialog when the user is working in that dialog. And when the user dismisses the dialog, you should return the keyboard focus back to the initial element that opens the dialog. So one example here is, this example is pretty interesting. It's called Incredible Accessible Model Window. So if I move to the View the Model Window button, and I click on it, right, it opens the model, and my focus is in the dialog as I tab through all this field and buttons. Once I close the dialog, my focus returns back to the button that initiated the model dialog, so the user can continue on the page. So this is really good practice for a lot of applications, right? You don't want the user tap to a thing, open the dialog, finish the dialog, and then they have to start from the top of the page. So that's really bad user experience for keyboard users. So we talk about the focus and how you manage focus, keyboard trap. And then the second part of this knowledge and technique is the semantic HTML. So a concept that's really important is called accessibility tree. So it's kind of, imagine this is the tree that screen readers or other accessible technology use to interpret the web content. So it's like the screen reader's DOM tree, if you will. So the browser will take the normal DOM tree and render the accessibility tree to the screen readers. So it's each browser's responsibility to take what you have in your HTML and then render that, make it available. There's a bunch of accessibility API in each browser. The screen reader uses those API to read the accessibility tree from the browser. So like, for example, some browsers even have this display. So if you have Microsoft Edge, in this button here, the kind of the time clock button there, it will show you the accessibility tree of the current page. And you can see I have this application for the buttons, for the links. They will show the name of the element, the state of those element. And in Chrome, the developer version of Chrome, you also have a accessibility tree view next to the normal DOM view. Okay, so this screenshot shows a typical booking flight form. So you have this radio button to select either one-way trip or round trip. You have a name input, and then you have a seat type drop-down list, and then you have a search button, right? This is how browser interpret this form and then convey that information to screen readers. So the browser will tell the screen reader, hey, this is a button. It has a name called round trip. and the state is selected. I mean, not a button, option input. So the screen readers will read this and then convey that information back to the real user. So again, also the screen reader will relay users' input like mouse clicks or keyboard clicks back to the accessibility tree to the browser. The browser will take that input and change the state of the page for the user. So as developers, we really need to express the semantics of the page correctly. Because if we don't have good semantics, the browser doesn't know what information it needs to convey to the screen reader. And we need to have accessible names and descriptions, because again, those information will be put into the accessibility tree for screen readers to use. And we need to make sure important elements have accessible roles, states, and properties, which we'll talk about in a moment. So one good thing is most HTML interactive elements have implicit semantics, so the role and the state. So like button, link, select, input, those are native support. You have native support. So we should take advantage of this. And then they also work across browsers. So one example is I have a link. So I just use the native A element. And then if I turn on the screen reader, sorry, let me go back.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 3.
Okay.
Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 3, Tab 1, Tab 1, Tab 1,
Oh, okay.
Tab
Sorry.
1, Tab 1, Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 3, Tab 1. Title of section, stuff. Title of Tab 1, Tab 1, Tab 1, Tab 2.
For some reason, it keeps focus to the button there.
Tab 3, Tab 1 section, Tab 1, Tab.
Okay.
Tab 1, Tab 2,
Whoa.
Tab 3, Tab 1 section, Tab 1.
I was trying to.
Dimmer, Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 3, Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 3, Tab 1 section, title of section, stuff.
It was working fine
Title
10
of
minutes ago in the
second
hallway.
section, title of
It's
third
just
section.
gremlins in the room.
VoiceOver on Chrome, HTML semantics example, window, Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 3, Tab
Okay.
1, Tab 2, Tab 3, Tab 1 section.
Sorry about that.
Tab 2, Tab 3, Tab 1 section, Tab 1.
I think it's maybe because I'm in the full screen view. Let me try again, sorry.
How many of you here have tested with a screen reader?
VoiceOver on Chrome, HTML Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 1. Tab
Yeah,
2, Tab 3,
I don't know what happens here,
Tab 3,
but
Tab 1 section, Tab 1, Tab 2, Tab 3, Tab 1 section, Tab 1, Tab 2.
let me go back.
We actually built some functionality so that screen readers can screen read the map.
Oh, you did build functionality?
That's cool. We should
talk to us afterwards.
Yeah. But yeah, basically the screen reader will read a row. This is a link. Since we have text inside the A element, it will read this is Esri homepage link, and it will say, hey, this is focusable. You can say focus to this link. And then another example is a checkbox, right? So a checkbox has a native row called checkbox, and then it has a name because I have text next to a checkbox, and then have a state. Is it focusable? Is it checked or not checked? So the screen reader will actually read this and also show the text input, the text display panel there. So we talk about native HTML elements that are interactive will receive keyboard focus. So the link, the button, the input. One thing I want to point out is the button needs to support space key. So if you write a button, if you use custom HTML, make sure you need to make sure that button receives space key, because in the native HTML specification, space key can activate the button. So links and input, you can use click or enter key to activate those elements. So like I said, some of the HTML elements will not have implicit semantics, so like div or span. And sometimes we need to use those elements to make interactive elements, right? So like buttons or menus, things like that. How do we make those things accessible? So first, we need to make those things focusable. So we need to add tab index equal to 0 to those elements, right? And then we need to write some JavaScript to make sure those elements receive keyboard events, like the space key, the enter key. And then we need to give them a name. Either we use a text label next to those elements, or we use implicit text, like ARIA labeled by, which we'll talk about later. And then some of the things will have different roles. Are they a menu or alert message dialog or things in that nature? We should specify a role if whenever possible. And then some of the things we may have different states, like the checkbox checked, unchecked. For menu, you will have expanded, collapsed. Those states should be also communicated to the screen reader. So which brings the third part of this knowledge is the ARIA. ARIA is called Web Accessibility Initiative, Accessible Rich Internet Applications. It's a long name, but the reason we need ARIA is, first of all, we should use native HTML elements whenever possible, but certain semantics and interactions are not supported right now by native HTML elements. For example, a pop-up menu. We don't have anything in HTML that says, hey, I can just write this will be a pop-up menu. We have to write things on our own. Another example is like you have an alert message. The user that needs to know about this as soon as possible. Maybe you have an internet connection breakdown or there's some changes in your data. You need to communicate as soon as possible to the user. It's easy for the sighted user because they can see your error message. But for low vision user or non-sighted user, you should write some custom HTML using the ARIA attributes to communicate that information to non-sighted users. We'll have a demo of that in a moment. But ARIA is kind of the specification for increasing the accessibility of the custom elements. It is well supported across all the major browsers. So you shouldn't have any problem if you write ARIA elements in your HTML. And then it kind of augmented the DOM or the accessibility tree in your browser. So maybe you're missing some of the rows or states, but if you add ARIA, correct appropriate ARIA attributes or states in those elements, the screen reader or the accessibility technology will get the full information from the accessibility tree. So, but ARIA doesn't do anything about focus. So you still have to take care of the tab index. And then it doesn't support keyboard interactions. You still need to write JavaScript to receive those keyboard events. So still need to implement custom behaviors. But ARIA kind of is focused on the accessibility tree to make sure the screen reader can get the full information as the normal user. So there are three types of ARIA attributes. So we talk about the roles. So the meaning of the element, basically. What is this thing? Is it a tooltip? Is it a tab list? Is it a search? And then the property of the element is the second type. So the relationship and functions. Or is it, for example, you may have a field that is required. It's easy to just have a star or next to the field says, for visual users, they can say, oh, this is a required field. But for non-sighted users, we need to use ARIA required attribute to indicate that. And then if you have that in that field, then the screen reader will tell the user, hey, this is a required field. And then states, we talk about the checkbox, checked or unchecked states. You use ARIA checked to indicate that for the screen readers. So one example is this is a checkbox. Right, I just write a LI, but I style it as a checkbox. So go back to the code here. I have the tab index, so it can be focused. I have the checked indicator, so I will see the check mark. But for screen reader users, there's no way for them to know this is the checkbox, because they can see it, right? And then I use the LI element instead of the checkbox element. So that the screen reader will still understand this as the LI element. So what I need to do here is I add a row. I say, even though this HTML is an LI element, its row is a checkbox. I also add the ARIA checked for the checkbox state. It says true. So screen reader know, oh, this is a checkbox, and also it's checked. Let me show you the screen reader example. Hopefully this will work.
Void tab 1, tab 2, tab 1, tab 1.
No.
Tab 3, tab 1 section, tab 1, tab 2.
But yeah.
Tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, tab 1 section, tab 1, tab 2.
Okay. I hope it works for me. That's a bummer, but yeah. But it will say this is a checkbox, this is checked, and then we'll read the text inside of it. We'll figure out how this works after this presentation. And then if you have any questions, then just contact us, and then we can show you the example here. Okay, so the rows, so landmarks. So there are different, ARIA defines certain landmarks for the page. So you can say this is the banner, this is the content info, this is the main, this is navigation. And this will really help screen readers to understand the page structure. So one example here, I hope this will work. This is the ArcGIS Online's new item details page. So we're kind of designing those pages to be accessible moving forward. So let me turn on the screen reader. Okay, this works. So the page has all those landmarks built in. So I can use, ignore the voice. So I can use the menu to jump to a particular section on the page this will make this screen reader user quickly to get to different parts of the page.
Banner, navigation, search, main, no items in landmarks menu, loading more items, no items in landmarks menu, Vancouver, Canada scene, system preferences.
I think there's something wrong with the keyboard. Okay, let me turn it off. Okay, there are some other rows, like those are landmarks or rows are for pages, right? But if you write a widgets, like alert dialog or data grid or tab list, those are for this. Those are rows that you can assign to those widgets. And then let's talk about a little bit about properties. One of the most common used property is called ARIA label. So like the hamburger menu, right? It doesn't have a text. So for non-sighted users, the user want to know what this button is for. So we need to add an ARIA label, say this is a menu. And it will override anything you have inside the button. But since this is a graphic button, it doesn't matter. So the screen reader will read this menu from the ARIA label, and it won't affect visual users. It won't affect normal users, because normal users can still see this is a hamburger menu. Another example is called ARIA labeled by. So this is where you can specify another element in the DOM as the label for your element. So the drinking option is in the span, right? I have a list of radio buttons, and I can specify the list of radio buttons is labeled by the drink options span. I just need to specify the ID. So the good thing about ARIA label by it is you can use it for any element, so not just buttons or links. And then relationships, ARIA owns. So for example, for some reason you have this multiple label menu, right? And then one parent menu has a sub menu. And then for some reason in the DOM, you have to write them separately. But you can use ARIA owns to say, hey, for the new menu, the document, spreadsheet, the presentation, that is a sub menu of this new menu. So you can, again, use the ID to indicate the relationship. And then another one is called ARIA described by. So we already have the password as a label for the text input, but also you have another text says about the rules of the password input. So visually, you can tell the semantic relationship between the input and the description, right? But for screen reader users or non-sighted users, they don't know about this relationship. So you have to use ARIA described by to say the password must be at least 12 characters is the rule for the text input. And then another relationship ARIA label is called ARIA controls. So let's say if you have a custom scroll bar, right? A scroll bar controls the main section of the page. You can use the ARIA controls to say this scroll bar controls the main page for the screen readers to understand that relationship. And then we talk about the hide elements, right? So you should use the display equal none or visibility equal hidden to hide elements. There's some subtle difference there. So the display none will not allocate space, and the visible hidden will allocate the space for that element. But this, either way, the element is hidden from the DOM tree, the accessibility tree, it's also hidden from the accessibility tree. Screen readers will not read those elements. So if you want to just hide something, but you still want screen reader users to read those things, you should not use this CSS attribute. And then on the other side, you may want to only show information only to screen reader users. For example, you may have a bar chart, you may have a graph that visual users or sighted users can read it without problem. But screen readers cannot read shapes or visual representations. So you need to provide text descriptions or maybe data tables, but you don't want those data tables to affect your visual design. So you can use this CSS class to hide that element, but screen readers can still read those information. And then sometimes you may want to hide certain visual elements. This is where ARIA hidden comes in handy. So a demo here, I will not use screen reader, but here I have this GitHub. It's a font icon. You don't want a screen reader to read the font icon because it has nothing in it, right? So you just say ARIA hidden equal to 2 to hide the font icon from the screen reader. So screen reader will just read the text. Okay, so the last part of this is called the semantic we talked about, right? There's information the user needs to know as quickly as possible. So it's called ARIA Live. And the role that works with ARIA Live is called alert. So I think the most reliable way to write this is you have a container already in a DOM that has a role equal to alert, right? And then when you have error message or things that you want user to know, you just fill in a container with the message. And then ARIA Live has 2 types. The polite is it will alert a user when the screen reader is available. And then ARIA Live equal to assertive is like, this is really important. Screen reader will stop what it's doing now and then just read that message for you. So I don't know if I can demonstrate this.
Do you want me to try it?
Yeah, okay.
Just to do a different machine?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna try it. I'll probably have the same issues, but let's see. So we have a sample.
Part locator, window, right trail, toggle button, has keyboard focus.
Okay, we have a sample app here, and we have ARIA Live enabled. So
You are currently on a toggle button inside of web content. To select or deselect this checkbox, press Control, Option, Space. 36 parts have the selected facility sports trail.
Right.
So I don't know if you guys heard that. So this map shows trails in, I think, Boulder, Colorado, and we have these buttons that allow people to filter by dog accessible, handicap accessible, horse trails. So when a sighted user clicks the button, they can see that the number of features on the map are less. They can also read the text about 36 parks. So what we did was we set up ARIA Live so that when they press that button, it reads back that information right away and says, hey, 36 parks were selected that meet your criteria. So that's an example of ARIA Live.
Right. I think
Horse trail, selected toggle button.
you go ahead and present the, because it's, that's, oh, sorry, I need to switch back.
Is it that time already?
No.
Do you have more?
Yeah.
Okay.
So some best practices, which we talk about a little bit when we introduce different techniques here. So first one is do not change native semantics unless you really have to do that. So for example, if you want to implement a heading, which is also a button, so don't do this. Assign a row to button to H2 tag, and then a better way of doing that is embed the button element inside H2. And then all the interactive ARIA elements must be usable with the keyboard. So one example is that if you have a button, customized button, you have a row equal to button, and you need to add tab index to equal to 0, and then you need to write some JavaScript to support the enter and the space actions. So you see where I'm going with this, right? So if you need a button, just use the button element. Otherwise, you have to do a lot of work. The tab index, the focus, the rows, the keyboard events, just a lot of work, right? So it's not worth it. So just use native HTML elements whenever possible. And then another thing is the keyboard user must be able to get the same information as the mouse user. So for example, if the mouse user can click through a data grid, to read information in each cell.
Oh gosh, sorry.
To read the information to each cell, the keyboard user should be able to use the tab key or arrow key to go into each cell and read that information. And then the third role is, I know a lot of people, a lot of web apps we've seen, they use row equal to presentation or area hidden equal to visible element and focusable element. This will really break the screen readers because it will read out people, when the screen reader focuses on element, it will say nothing. Or the keyboard user will focus on element and then it doesn't do anything. So if you have a button, you really want the user to use it, don't use the row equal to presentation because the screen reader will not be able to use the button. And then don't hide things if you want screen reader users to use those things. And then the fourth element is all the interactive elements need to have a label or name. So one pattern we use in Esri in our cloud-side web is we use label to kind of as a container for the input. So this will give us accessible label with the interactive element. It also makes that when you click on the text, it will focus the input. So it's kind of the extra benefit. It's a nice thing to have. Okay, so Kelly.
Okay, now we're going to talk about creating accessible web components. So there's another nice document that's worth reading on ARIA design patterns. So Tao mentioned earlier that there is no such thing. What was the example you used?
A pop-up menu.
Pop-up menu in HTML. There's no HTML pop-up menu element. So you have to create your own. And you're using divs probably and other HTML elements, and you need to assign these ARIA roles to it. So if you have to do that, it's worth coming to this documentation and checking it out. I think it's really, really useful. Let me go back up to the top. Okay, so there is a list of all these different types of components that you might want to create. So if you want to do a menu or a menu bar, you can come here and it tells you some text about it. It tells you the expected keyboard interaction that your menu bar should have, so it provides lots of detail on how it should work. And also, I use this sometimes when I'm figuring out how to test these elements, what the expected behavior is. They also have examples, some notes, the required ARIA role states and properties. This is all information that Tao already told you about. So we don't want to focus on this too long because the documentation is really good and really detailed. And if you have to do one of these things, just come here and check it out. The next thing we want to talk about is the accessible map. So this is tricky, right? Map has all these features on it. How do we make these maps accessible? I don't know that we have a super great answer, but there are some techniques you can use. The first thing I think is to try and remember that the map contents need to be perceivable and understandable too. So we have our app, where's our park locator app, where we created this symbology and these black shapes, and they look fine in the topographic base map. But what if we have a base map toggle or a base map gallery in our application and people switch to a different base map? So here we have satellite imagery. Those black label or black marker symbols don't look so great anymore. They're not really as perceivable. The contrast ratio is probably not high enough. And we might want to think about the different base maps that are offered and think of ways to deal with our symbology that's going to work well for the options that we provide. So we'll also want to deal with scaling of images and text. For non-sighted users, you have some strategies like providing information in a table, right? So they can access that table and browse the information in a table. You can have alternative text. In some cases, that might be enough. This map has 5 points on it that show these values, right? But in most cases, that's not going to quite cut it. So you probably want to provide people an alternate way to access that information. Google Maps has an interesting example. I think in the interest of time, we're not going to demo it, but they just sort of overlay a grid over the map and you can navigate through by tabbing through the content and then select the features. I think that works fine if you have a small number of features in your map in that extent that you're looking at. But if you had 180,000 points, that's not going to be so helpful. But these slides are available afterwards. So you can come in and check out that documentation and check out that example. So we're going to look at a demo. We looked at it earlier with live ARIA, but we're going to see that we have an example we put together that has some common accessibility issues. So we'll look at these and we'll look at briefly how you might find them in your app and fix them. So I think we mentioned earlier when Tao was talking that, one of the easiest tests you can do when you're testing for accessibility is to try and tab through your site. So let's say, I'm going to refresh my page. Let's say I come to this site and the first thing I try and do is tab through it. I can tell already I have a problem because the first tab I clicked, it took me to the third button in that list. So that's telling me I probably already have an issue with my tab order. I'm not following the natural DOM order. I've got something funky going on that I'm going to need to investigate. So I know that I have one problem. And you can look at things like, I mentioned earlier, if we have this base map gallery, is our contrast ratio good enough? Can we read this text? Is our website organized well? But there's also some tools that can be really helpful. One of these that I use all the time is the developer tools. So let's come here and go to the developer tools. There's this extension that you can run called the Axe Accessibility Checker by DQ Labs.
Yes.
Yeah. So I can just click on this button and analyze the page, and it tells me where it's found the problems. It tells me right away that I have some element that doesn't have sufficient contrast ratio. So I can come here and inspect that particular element. And I see, okay, my search parks label right here is a really light gray, right? I don't have any necessarily huge vision problems, but I can barely read that. So I know that I have an accessibility problem. And then Chrome has some nice tool that can help me figure out how to fix that accessibility problem. So if I come here to accessibility properties, I don't know, it might be kind of small for you to read that text, but under color, it has a yellow exclamation point next to it, and it tells me my contrast ratio is only 1.51 between the background color and the text color. And it gives me the WCAG guidelines. So if I want to meet the AA guidelines, I can use these colors and I'll be good. Or if I want to meet the AAA guidelines, I can use these other colors and I'll be good. So I like that. You can just click on it on the colors here and you can actually see it changes your text. So you can see how it looks in your design right within that page. So I use that tool a lot. I'm not a designer, so I like the cheat that they just tell me what colors I can use. Another problem is that it tells us that images must have alternate text. So we can see right here that we have a problem. We don't have alt text associated with this logo at the top of our page. That's an easy fix. We just add alt text, right, to our image. So that's sort of the low-hanging accessibility fruit. You can run this extension. You can fix the easy problems. And then it tells us that we have an element with a tab index that's greater than 0. So remember how I said we tabbed into the app and we ended up at the wrong place? It's because for some reason, here, we've specified tab index 3 on this button, so we're taking it out of the natural tab order and saying this is a tab index 3. So it messes things up. So we'll get rid of that. But then, I'm wondering why this button didn't tab. So let me inspect that and see what's going on. Oh, I can see that right there I did something bad, right? Instead of using a button for a button, I used a div for a button. And we can see that the other problems, like it works, it filters my map, but there's no focus, right? No focus element that we get with a button, so I would have to handle that. I would have to specify a tab index, I would have to specify the focus, I would have to specify the ARIA role and label and some keyboard navigation, and that's a hassle, just use a button. One other thing that I wanted to show you here in, the Chrome tools, is there's an accessibility experiment that you can turn on in the Chrome developer tools. If you go to the extensions and the settings, there's an accessibility inspection tool I think you can turn on. And that gives you access to this additional information. So Tao talked about the accessibility tree. If you want to visualize this for an element, you can click on the element and see the accessibility tree. If we have one with ARIA roles, like this one, or ARIA attributes, it tells me the ARIA attributes associated with it and some additional information that can be useful. So I like to keep these two tabs on.
Should probably go back to the slides.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the end of our sample app. It also used the search, so if you typed in the search widget in the JavaScript API, is accessible. If you enter the values, the screen reader will read it. You can search the results and access the pop-up information. But you can look at the demo. It's in the slides later. So the last little bit of information we wanted to talk about was automated testing. There's a couple different options for doing automated testing of your site. One of them is this ARIA command line tool by Adi Osmani. He's a Google developer. This is Node, so you install it through NPM, Node Package Manager, and then you can audit a particular website. So this example here shows the command A11Y. You give it a URL, in this case, pushing the results out to a text file so you can look at them later. Here's another example of the module usage of that ARIA extension. Another one is Axe Core. So I was using the Axe extension in Chrome. This is Axe Core. It's good for you to do automated accessibility testing. You install it with npm install, and then you include this script tag. You include the script tag. You can see it here, pointing to the axe.min.js. And then you can run your functions to test various functionality. There's good documentation on that on their website. We have a lot of resources. We showed you some of these already, the way ARIA authoring practices, the WCAG help. We have there's some courses that we think are useful if you're new to accessibility. I like the web accessibility one by Google. It's free, it's short, you can watch it at your desk. I think we covered everything else there, developer tools, fundamentals.
That's in the survey.
So last thing is, please take our survey. We want to make this better if we present it again next year. Anything that you wish we told us and that we didn't, or something that we did tell you and that you wish that we did not tell you, let us know. Feedback is helpful.
Yeah, we'll make sure next time the voiceover works.
There's always something that doesn't work, so if the voiceover works, something else won't work, like the projector, so.
So we have a few minutes for questions. Yes.
So you mentioned that the search widget, the built-in one in the API, I guess, is somewhat navigable, or you've made it navigable?
Yeah.
Are there plans to make the other ones somewhat navigable as well?
Yeah, so in the 4X API, the team is working really hard to make the widgets accessible and to think about accessibility principles when they're designing them. Yeah. If you notice problems, let us know, submit bugs. But yeah, so in the 4X.
So just kind of a follow-up on that. For certain widgets like, I don't know, measure and draw, that kind of necessitate a degree of acuity in interacting with the map. I mean, is making the menu accessible sufficient, or do we need to rethink how we use those tools?
Well, I think, in general, I think that those are tricky and that you may be able to just get exceptions for those as a general idea.
I think the general exception is if an interaction involves hand drawing, freehand drawing, those are exceptions in WCAG, so you don't have to provide equivalent interaction.
Are they explicit exceptions somewhere?
Yes, I think in the rules, we'll say. Especially freehand drawing, like if you just move the cursor on the map to draw a thing, or if you have to draw a line, connect two elements, those are exceptions that, it's no way for using keyboard only. But it may be possible to provide the equivalent information using other means, right? You don't have to use the same element, but that requires additional UX design for those kind of things.
Can I just ask
Yeah.
I know with like vector mapping coming in, maybe this is starting to become a bit moot, but is there a base map template that Esri makes available that maybe has, I won't say like, passable color contrast, but better color contrast? Something that could be tweaked.
That's a good question, and I've asked about it, and I don't think that we have one that's explicitly defined as accessible. But I mean, it's something definitely for us to look at. So, we are talking about this more and more and more on the team within ArcGIS Online and the JavaScript API team. So we're working hard to make improvements, and we know that it's important to the user community. So we're thinking, but that's a great question. I think I actually asked it a few months ago. So it's an excellent question.
Yes.
run into issues if you were using, let's say, like a jQuery or a Dojo button as opposed to just the native button HTML?
Yeah, I think for those kind of custom buttons, we use the same principle to evaluate it, right? So if it's focusable, if you can use keyboard, the enter key or space key to activate the button, if it has the accessible label, I think that's good enough. But we ran into some issues with some third-party UI libraries. So I think a safest approach, maybe a quicker approach, is to use native elements. For example, tables. You could have a table written in div, right? And then you support those keyboard focus, you support those keyboard interaction. But it's a lot of work to write a table, custom table, because HTML has a table element. Why not use the native one? It may be quicker, but I understand sometimes you have to use those things. But then, yeah, it's extra work and extra evaluation to do.
I wanted to just add one quick. I don't work with jQuery, or have not in a long time, so I don't know its accessibility guidelines. But Dojo cares about accessibility, and they do have a statement on accessibility. And if you go to any of their widgets, usually at the bottom of the page, there's information on the accessibility of that widget. So that doesn't mean that there aren't any problems in any of the widgets. In some of them there are, just like in some of ours there are. But if there are, you should submit a bug and let them know and ask them to fix it. But they care about this issue, and they're trying to ensure that their stuff is accessible. So.
Yeah, I think a general trend for us, especially for online, is moving forward. We want to use a lot of native HTML elements, just make the page cleaner, and it's easier to work with all the screen readers. Yeah.
Anybody else? All right, well, thanks for coming,
Thank you so
and
much.
we appreciate it.